Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. Welcome to Not Just Ads, the Creator Economy for B2B. I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris Bailey. Chris has a seasoned marketer in a number of positions, most recently as a Global Marketing Director of Integrated Market at ServiceNow. He's known for driving transformation across the industry in B2B. He blends strategic vision with operational rigor, building high-performance teams, scalable systems that turn brand into pipeline. And he's very passionate about the evolution of B2B marketing in the post-AI world. Chris, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Looking forward to it, Marcus.
I'd just like to delve right into it and get your feedback, because I think you have a lot of thoughts around this point around B2B thought leadership, which means a very different thing to a lot of different businesses. I'd just like to get what your definition, what you think it is and what it's not, in your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can mean a lot of things inside the same business sometimes. Thought leadership is two words. It can have multiple different meanings. It can be the name of a team. It can be the name of a piece of content. It's obviously the expression of expertise in a field, the kind of the macro thing we know of. It can also be storytelling of that expertise. And of course, you have people themselves called thought leaders. As I say, in an organization or in a marketing team, those things could be owned by different people. You can get different interpretations of what they are and the meaning. And so working together just becomes a lot harder. So I guess if I try and simplify it, my definition would be something like, thought leadership is the expression of ideas and insights to demonstrate an expertise in a field. Thought leader is someone who does that. Piece of thought leadership is an output of that. But whoever does it, it's got to be that expression of insight to demonstrate expertise. Now, when you're doing that thought leadership, why are you doing it? Well, you're probably trying to influence people's thinking, spark conversations, and ultimately, you're probably doing it because you're trying to sell something. You're trying to sell value to a customer. So let's kind of put the needle on that and say good thought leadership should be unique, because it's not really leadership if you're saying the same thing as everyone else. And it's got to express that insight that aligns to a value to your customers based upon that expertise. What's not thought leadership? Well, it's generic. It doesn't align to customer value, and you can't really monetize what you're talking about it because it doesn't express that expertise.
Yeah. Do you think then, like, it done properly, proper thought leadership, you really should be thinking about like a particular ICP, or can it be done across a buying group in B?
Yeah, I mean, I think the genesis of thought leadership is it's intellectual property, really. It's that thing that you know of. It's that thing that you're trying to articulate the value of to an organization. Organizations, thought leadership is ideally done through some kind of storytelling, and organizations with multiple people all trying to do the same things, there can be a tendency to tell too many stories. So you do want to think, when you're thinking of a buying group, how do I make this so that everybody understands the same story, so we're saying the same thing? If I tried to tell you, the story of one Marvel movie now, there's a chance you might remember it in some of the characters. I told you the entire Marvel franchise, you're probably not going to remember any of them. It becomes decreasing returns. So really aligning on that single story and then taking it out so that the product becomes in the mind of the customer. That's kind of the genesis of kind of connected storytelling through thought leadership.
When you're looking at the content and the story around thought leadership, how do you see insight versus research for a B2B marketer or even a creator? How do you actually find meaningful insight in terms of building your content story around thought leadership? What do you think when we look, let's say a lot of companies, obviously they're doing research in terms of who their buying committee is. There's a lot of research around hitting buyers, what's important to them and so on as well. What do you think can be drawn then, like in terms of how you position that into story content that's like consumable, but it's relatable as well? How does that differ then in terms of like when you're approaching, say, insight versus research?
I mean, there can be, I think, for some folks, that kind of chicken and egg situation of what comes first, the research or the insight. Well, I'd say, insight is what typically starts first. And where do most organizations come from? Well, there's normally a founder, and that founder's got an idea or a vision or a background in something that they've seen, that they're passionate about, that they think can be done better. That's their IP. That's their unique insight they want to try and tell the story to. And so they build an organization around that. They may or may not have actual kind of market research behind that, because they may just know they've seen it enough times and say, I know that this is true, and they can then go and build it. So when we then think of kind of research, well, the kind of a research element to kind of come up with, the actual story, it probably serves two purposes. So, going to a customer saying, we just know this to be true, it's not that convincing when it kind of has a self-serving element behind it. And so you can use research to substantiate sometimes and get that data, get that evidence, get those statistics or whatever it is you're trying to build to validate, I suppose, your insight. The second side of things, say your insight is more of a technical insight, a new way of building something. Well, you need to articulate the value still. And, going in just saying, well, we've got this great product, that's not going to cut it sometimes when you're trying to communicate customer value. You want to position it. So the research can be a way of saying, well, how does this apply? What's the value? What's the use case? So you may need the story to try and articulate that, to make it into that narrative that somebody's going to remember, see the application of to them, and then be able to kind of apply at the relevant time.
Yeah. And it probably builds a lot of trust then as well, if you're validating with proper research from an external
It does. There's a lot of credibility that comes with having somebody else do it, or just going to a large sample size, or being able to kind of have that external validation that this is what my expertise is coming to. And that can be a tricky one when you actually start with the research, not knowing what your insight is. And you're trying to build a story. Organizations get there sometimes when they have that founder and they diversify and things change, they can sometimes lose their way. And we see that all the time. Simon Sinek wrote Start With Why based upon that whole idea of knowing what your purpose and your foundation is. And sometimes you have to rebuild what your thought leadership position is, or your position is to the market. When Salesforce started, they were kind of convincing people about cloud computing. That was their whole position. There is a new way of doing business that you don't have to buy and, reinstall huge server farms, management costs of people and everything else. You get it straight away, whether or not you're an enterprise or a small business, you can get the same tools. And they had this thought leadership position. Now, you get to kind of like 10, 20 years down the line, cloud computing is ubiquitous. That doesn't cut it anymore. So they had to kind of go through this reinvention there. So the technical foundations can move forward, the organization, the leaders can change. And sometimes you do have to reground, but you still need to know what that purpose is and where you're starting from first. And then, as you say, validate, build the trust, build the credibility.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What do you look at then when you're looking at like external, say, research? What have you found is useful in the past in terms of organizations or places of research? Anything that comes to mind in terms of in the B2B space that you feel that they're doing good work and that it's reliable, but also effective as well in terms of helping you plan and also look at the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it depends upon your objective. I think if you're going to go to one of the analysts and you're partnering with them on something, you get a kind of referred credibility when you have your name and their logo on the same piece of content. There's that kind of, they're an authority figure in this space. So you get to have that kind of, that, as I say, referred credibility of the fact that you've got, to your point, a trusted organization stakeholder. It's not just self-interest, it's something else. So if your purpose is one that requires you to kind of sell an idea to somebody, then that's really good. If you're doing something which is more of a kind of state of the market, where you're maybe just trying to kind of lay things out, you can do it with yourself. You can work with more just a dedicated research firm. Or if you're trying to build more of an integrated story around this, maybe you want to work with a media partner. There's some great kind of vendors who can work with you on the escalation, the kind of promotion of some of that story at the same time. So it becomes a co-content development aspect. So again, it depends upon what your objective is, but there's some kind of great different solutions that you can use to kind of strengthen and extend that story you're trying to tell.
Yeah. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about as well around, like, we're seeing B2B is changing a lot, as you've probably seen, in terms of now there's much more scrutiny across all marketing teams around ROI and budgets and so on, but also in terms of how they look at that as a function from brand to demand and the funnel and so on. How you've said great thought leadership can drive both brand and demand. Tell me more in terms of like how you see that fits into the funnel, and in 2025 in terms of, we look at a funnel traditionally before as like MQLs and so on, but now we see very broad buying groups. It's very messy in terms of the long sales cycles. How do you think the thought leadership content B2B content plays into that and effect on throughout the process when somebody is on that journey from barely being even in market to maybe not even being in market to being like very close to actually making a decision to purchase.
Yeah, so I think brand and demand are those concepts that they sound similar, so they get bundled together and they get thrown around a lot. Sometimes with kind of different interpretations of meaning. Is brand just big advertising and demand is just opportunity creation? I think of them, slightly more like this. My brand is what you think of me. It's the story you tell yourself about me. It's the trust you have and the genuineness of my character. If I'm an organization, my brand is about me. Demand is what you think of you. Demand is the story you tell yourself about what you need or what opportunity there is available or what risk you need to mitigate. And the role of marketers, be they brand focused or demand focused, is to shape those stories, because it's not what the brand says, it's what the customer remembers and hears and thinks when you're not in the room that's key. There's a great sales insight that says the product is in the mind of the buyer. And if you've got a buyer that thinks you're a brand that's particularly great at squares, and you create a demand from them that I need to have some squares to fix my square issue, you've got a great synergy there. You've got a really great connection of those two, of the brand, you, or me, the demand, you. Now, that customer may not be in the market to buy squares for a long time. And I think this is kind of what people are catching on to. They might not be able to buy squares because they've actually got an existing square vendor. So the key is to to get that perception, that brand built ahead of time, so that when Square is demanded, those two snap together. You're creating that connected story in the mind of the customer. And one's about me, one's about you. So they have different things. Now, let's lock that back into thought leadership. You can have a thought leadership position for an organization, and you can have it for a specific solution. Now, if your thought leadership for an organization is, we make the best quality squares in the world, and that's what our entire purpose is, getting 4 straight lines and putting them together better than anybody else, customers are going to remember that. Now you go out there, create demand at the relevant time when they're actually able to move forwards for those squares. You've actually started to connect to them again. You could say the value of squares has changed over the past few years. There's a risk that people are starting to use lots of curves in their squares, and we can actually do it better quality. If this metaphor is going too far, I apologize. But if you're building that demand, saying actually there's a straight line shortage going on now, but we can supply you, you're connecting the demand and the brand together. So my analogy of the two is brand can create demand, demand can create brand. If you're saying we build the best squares, somebody may say, I want squares. I can think of them later. They work together. And we see this all the time in the real world. You see celebrities who go out and kind of start up their own gin, for example. Well, they've got a brand, that's them. And they naturally create demand because people want to be associated with them. If you're building a thought leadership position to say, I'm a leader in this space, and that's helping you sell loads and loads of great software, let's finally move off squares. If your solution, your leadership position that you're creating with your thought leadership is building that demand, you're selling loads of software, you're building a reputation in the marketplace, well, that's building your brand. So the brand could build demand, the demand could build your brand. And it kind of depends on where you are in your evolution of your journey. If you're a small software vendor, you may choose to focus, I'm just going to focus on connecting sales, great conversion rate, drive massive value. If you've got a problem where sales is saying, actually, we can create all this pipeline, but nobody knows about us, then you maybe want to invest in the brand side of things. I don't know there's a hard and fast rule of which way how far you swing the pendulum in each direction. But I think it's always got to be a balance of the two. It's never just one or the other.
Yeah. How do you think then in terms of B2B content, there's still, if we're looking at surface led metrics of impressions and clicks and so on, and that can be different depending on the size of the audience in terms of you with a large budget, your burn rate is longer and so on. But with smaller organizations, they need results fast. There's a lot of pressure from VCs or whoever else. What do you think that they should look at in terms of seeing, does something have traction? Let's say they test their ICP. They have the content there. Everything is created, but now it's in the actual what should you be looking at in from your experience in terms of leading metrics to go okay, we're on the right road here. We know the sales cycle is long, but the initial feedback, it's what would you look at normally?
I think it's important to remember what KPIs are. They're kind of their performance indicators. They're not the goal unto themselves. I think when teams start to set a KPI as being their only goals. That's where you start to get the vanity metrics and basically silos working, because people are no longer aligned to the macro objectives that they're looking for. And I think when you're trying to build those KPIs, particularly if you're maybe trying to convince a stakeholder to look bigger than just number of MQLs. If you've got a highly traditional stakeholder that only wants to go for MQLs and you want to try and convince them to go bigger, that's a conversation that can be quite challenging. I've got a young daughter, and I'm sure many parents would agree or share similar experiences. Trying to convince her to do something she doesn't want to do is really difficult.
Yeah.
You have to actually kind of work and find a way of convincing somebody to do it. You can't force people or just kind of say we're only using this. You have to actually align it to the value they're looking at. So, when we are looking at goals and KPIs, we're trying to understand, say you're creating a set of pipeline, but actually you're seeing maybe a middle of funnel acceleration or progression lower than the rates you're expecting, or you're losing deals. And you speak to sales and they say, well, actually, nobody knows who you are. That can be the start of that story, because then you've got the sales-led insight on something that is typically a sales-led set of metrics, because demand metrics are typically aligned on some measure to a sales funnel. And then you can start to bring in industry data and say, well, look, our investment in one versus in brand versus the industry standard is significantly off. You could bring in some aided awareness data to show how your competitors are operating and their sales growth versus yours. You can start to build a holistic picture that says that the problem we're collectively trying to solve is we're trying to grow revenue or drive retention. Where are we seeing the problems? Well, actually, it's in this space. The insight and the data and the expertise from both sales and marketing is leading us towards this. And then we can get to a set of metrics. And ultimately, it goes back to my first point. There's a key matter of trust. The sales or the CFO or the CRO, do they trust that marketing is going to deliver the value in the right place? You get that trust right, and you can build it effectively. Typically, to do that, I'd say there's probably 4 or 5 different blocks of measures you want to try and put in. Are we building mindshare? Are we creating opportunities? Are we accelerating and closing them? And are we driving some kind of adoption onto renewal at the end of it? And if you kind of look at it in that lens, just from the kind of funnel or the kind of the key business metrics, you can then start to say, are we doing the right things? And then the KPIs, they're indicators. Again, they're not the final thing that every team is focused on. They're saying, are we looking like we're doing the right things to suggest where we should be optimizing the delivery of our value?
Yeah. In terms of then, like, if we just take a step back of like content itself. So let's say the thought leadership piece, you have like maybe 1 or 2 people that are very active in a large organization, and let's say it's C-suite, but you want to take it down a step in terms of, but because it's broader and they have an impact around the ICPs that they would target within the organization. What do you think is a useful framework in terms of for maybe B2B companies, whether it's SMBs or larger enterprise organizations, to use to get a team to scale a thought leadership program? What would you think could be something that's useful to get started? We discussed about the KPI piece, but like just in order to get started and get scaling, what do you think is effective?
Yeah, I mean, scaling is one of the hardest things that you can do, I think, in most organizations. And for thought leadership and for storytelling of thought leadership, consistency is key. You can tell variations upon a story, you can reiterate through different lenses, but if you start telling entirely different stories, you're going to get confused. My Marvel analogy, if you try and one person tells a story of the Hulk and the other person tells the story of Captain America, somebody's going to get confused over to, who and what is actually happening in it. So I think that the first thing actually is to land upon, well, who owns the story?
Yeah.
And that's probably going to land somewhere near the top. And maybe they kind of defer responsibility to that, but they then say, right, this is clearly where the story is owned. And that's really important, because that's not a kind of thing that you can federate out to 30 people sometimes. Federate out elements to it, but it's got to roll up against some kind of governance structure. And once you've got that clear ownership, the key then is, you got to land upon a simple, unexpected, concrete, emotive story that you can repeat, that's got capacity that you can build on, that's going to be something you can tailor to each different audience, to talk to the value, to talk to your uniqueness of your ability. And then if you have different execs, those execs need to tell the story within this. You don't end up diluting the story. So you start again with the ownership. Who's got final sign-off? Sitting probably near the top. Then you need to build the framework. What are the pillars of that you're going to be trying to talk about? Then you probably need to build the team that's going to be driving the execution of that. And And I think this idea that you can build a piece of thought leadership content, put it on the website, and then say your job is done, move on to the next one, is kind of a very old-fashioned way of thinking about, integrated company storytelling when you're trying to connect brand and demand. You need to own this thing end to end all the way through, which means governance, which means review, which means sign off, which means committed planning to use this stuff as you go along, starting in advance, following through to the execution, making sure that what you're saying on your website front page is the same as you're saying on your marketing, which is the same as you're saying on your demand marketing, which is the same as you're saying in your sales enablement and your SDRs, and you're all trying to tell that same story. And again, that doesn't happen in a content engine. The content is a part of a wider execution of storytelling.
Yeah. Where do you think it aligns then, though? Should that come from the mission and vision statement the whole way down? Or is it more in terms of the problem you're trying to solve in the market? Or where do you think like the origins of a story like that should come to be effective marketing channel?
I do think it starts with your purpose as an organization. And I think that's why organizations invest as much in it as they do, when they realize the importance of it is to understand, well, why are we here? What do we exist for? You look at Microsoft when Satya Nadella came in. It was really about trying to reground the purpose of Microsoft. Why does this company actually exist, and what do we try and do? And you saw some pretty clear moves within that to try and actually recenter what the organization is. It's not just about making money. It's about creating value for customers that you can monetize. And I think almost every organization is in that on some extent. So what is the value that we create to the world? Now, I think the actual storytelling should sit within the marketing organization, but it should be aligned through the kind of the purpose of the company. If you've got a founder, if you've got the same founder, they are typically that hub, that guide, that person who started, to my previous point, with that vision of this can be done better. We can create amazing opportunities, remove risks, give customers this value, and we'll see that through. It's just as organizations grow through both age, development, expansion, and people changing roles, that you have to constantly reinvest in the strength of that to keep your purpose focused. And you see it when you've got organizations that are firing all cylinders, performing really well. It's because, as much as can be said, everybody right the way from the top down to the bottom is really singing behind that same vision.
Yeah. For B2B at the moment, especially in the B2B creator / influencer / thought leader, for want of a better word, but what do you think are the big trends over the next, say, 6 to 18 months? We're seeing some companies that are working with B2B creators that are creating content. There's a match there, the message they have versus the mission and the vision of the company. Any other trends that you see in this space that you think that are exciting that B2B should take and amplify more?
I mean, we've been speaking for nearly 30 minutes and we haven't mentioned AI yet. So I feel I'm obligated, maybe not contractually, but in some other means to talk about AI within here. I mean, AI is, both a huge asset and a great transformer of the marketing organization. At the simplest level, it's changing the way that content production gets done. It's been changing the way that media execution has been done for quite a long time already. And so we're already seeing the fact that, you've got content and you've got greater personalization of that content, and thus you've got greater potential for storytelling aligned to that idea of building the product in the mind of the customer that you can execute at scale. And so I think we're going to see a much greater extension of that as we go. I think it's also changing the way people search for things as well. We're moving from search engine optimization to more like AI optimization, answering the question people have before they even go to the vendor. So the importance of the brand and who's on your top 5 or top 10 list before you even get to making that, demand conversation, before you engage with sales, it's going to kind of push it up the radar significantly. And since you mentioned it, yeah, you're right. There was an event the other week, and folks were talking about the fact that, there are great influencers out there, and actually they do that themselves. That's kind of their side hustle. That's the thing that they you want to build a brand within an organization. Well, they're building a brand for themselves. So, they are fast, they are agile, they are nimble. How can you apply those same principles, but with all the kind of the safeguards that go around a brand without losing that strength? So I think we're going to see a lot of those things where, as we've continued to see for a while, the kind of liberation of content and allowing customers to tell more of the stories in a kind of faster, more connected way that organizations kind of curate that experience.
Yeah. Chris, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a really interesting conversation.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot.